General Pannu was a person in the army dealing with exactly this subject. We are going to have our interview in 3 parts. Today we will talk till about 11:55 and take few questions also. The next session will be on Thursday, 7:30 to 7:55 in the evening, and the third and the final session will be on next Sunday. Today we are going to talk about disruptive technologies, but in non-contact and non-kinetic environment. What is disruptive technologies? Some time back, I got a call from Army War College in Mahu. They said, Kisa, we have heard that you write about these kind of things. So can you talk? And what do you think is the biggest disruptive technology today that we have? I said, yes, I know. There's a virus called the Chinese virus. Some people call it Corona, some people call it COVID-19. But this is the biggest disruptive technology the humankind is ever seen. Do you want me to speak on that? He said, no, we don't. This is not what we're expecting from you. When we talk of disruptive technologies, we mean artificial intelligence, we mean robotics, we mean nanotechnology, we mean hypersonic weapons, we mean quantum technology. I said, okay, I'm an infantry officer. Well, I have heard of these things and I do talk about it once in a while, but I'm not the person to talk about it. So therefore, I was not taken in the panel of that seminar that they had for 3 days on disruptive technologies. But today we have a very, very qualified person to talk on this issue. And I'm personally thankful to General Pannu for having accepted the invitation straight away. I spoke to him. I said, do we talk on it? He said, yes. And that's it. People should realize that today, till just few days back or few months back, he was heading the very this particular subject in the Indian Army. What I'll do now is I'll introduce you very briefly his illustrious career. He's got so many achievements that to talk about him in the next 2 minutes is going to be difficult, but I'll highlight certain things because most of this brief biodata of his has been put on the Facebook, and I'm sure you have gone through it. He has a very impressive and illustrious career in the armed forces, spread over nearly 4 decades. And mind you, he's a second generation officer. What is out of his complete biodata, what is of importance to me personally is that he commanded 22 Maratha Light Infantry. And I have a lot of connection with 22 Maratha Light Infantry because when I did my bios, when I was in the regimental center, my roommate was Colonel S.N. Upadhyay, who happened to be from 22 Maratha. So I started knowing about it right since those days. And some other lighter moments I will mention to you a bit later. He commanded a brigade on the LOC. He commanded a division on the Chinese front. And most important, he commanded a very 14 Corps in Ladakh, which was the scene of action all this while. And here I must just go slightly off the subject, and I must tell you that during the peak of Ladakh crisis, the 14th Corps was commanded by a Maratha Light Infantry officer, Lieutenant General Harinder Singh, and I must talk about his name very, very proudly. General Pannu thereafter has done a lot of things. He was the one who raised the Defense Space Agency. He's raised the Defense Cyber Agency. He was also headed the Special Forces Division. So I'm really tempted to talk on all these issues because while a lot of people know about surgical strike in Kashmir, what the army did, people know about the surgical strike which was done at Balakot, but the one that was done in Myanmar, and incidentally I've spoken on this subject, Operation Sunrise, if I remember the name correctly, some time back from the very forum, but if there is a time later, we can talk about these issues also. But today, we'll entirely focus on the technological issues, and to talk to us about it is General Pannu will tell us all about it. And what I would like to mention before I stop his introduction is that he's developing a concept called Military 4.5, which requires the defense forces to guide the industry so that we leapfrog as far as defense technology is concerned. I must add here that he has a number of decorations to his credit: Param Vishishta Seva Medal, Ati Vishishta Seva Medal, Vishishta Seva Medal, and not to mention that he's also been awarded Chief of Army Staff Commendation Card. I'll very briefly come about the subject. Actually, it is customary that when you get a person to Savarkar Smarak to talk on any issue, we always present these people with a book which was written on Swatantraveer Savarkar. This book cannot be shown to him, cannot be given to him now because it's this physical thing cannot be done. But I must tell you virtually, this is the book that we would have presented to him, and the book has been dispatched to him. Hopefully, it will reach him in a short while. I'll very quickly cover the topic, introduce you to to all the disruptive technologies, and then I'll request the general to cover the subject. Today, we are fighting a multi-domain war against China in Ladakh. We have cyber attacks. We have Chinese stealing our intelligence. There were a lot of disruptive things which they used, and no less a person than Chief of Defense Staff General Rawat mentioned that by using few disruptive technologies, Chinese thought that they could scare the Indian Army. Of a late, there was a fire which took place in the Serum Institute, which manufactures vaccine. Was it a fire or was it a sabotage? There was a avalanche which came down in the month of February in Uttarakhand. There was a talk that possibly a disruptive technology like direct energy weapons may have been used. There was a attack on the electricity grid of Maharashtra in Mumbai, and for 12 hours, Mumbai was in dark. Was that a cyber attack by Chinese? Well, it was, but it was not given too much of publicity. So these all are disruptive technologies which are there. Disruptive technologies has positive uses, it has negative uses. Why is this subject important to general public is if you can utilize the positive uses, then we can become much better country at governing ourselves and reap the benefits of disruptive technology. Negative uses, of course, are really have to be avoided, but we will talk about it when General Pannu touches the subject. So very briefly now, I will, I'll end in next 1 or 2 minutes. If you look at Indian Armed Forces capability to, let's say, accept technology, our performance in developing disruptive military technologies over 3 decades has been quite unsatisfactory. We have had a number of agencies, a number of reports, expert reports, and I can mention some of them. There was a report prepared by a group of ministers in 2001. There was a report of Kelkar Committee. There was a report of Sisodia Committee. There was a report of Ramarao Committee. All of them talked about technology, how it should be inducted. But what we did was a very little was implemented out of it. It is not to say that we did not implement it, but the implementation was not up to the mark. So what does the future hold as far as disruptive technology is concerned? To tell you about it, I will invite now General Pannu to talk on this very important issue. But what I would like to tell you just once is that there are 2 approaches as far as let's say introducing disruptive technologies in the armed forces and at a national level. One is chalta hai approach, ki yes, we are doing something about it, and second is leapfrogging approach, or accepting it so fast that we are able to start reaping the benefit in the very near future. So to talk to us on all these issues related to national issues of disruptive technologies, we have General Pannu with us today, and I invite the General to share his thoughts on this very important subject. Over to General Pjs Pannu.
Thank you, Brigadier Mahajan, and I must thank the Savarkar Smarak also, to have invited me to speak at this very respected platform. It is a very relevant issue that when we talk about China, we know that last year, largely the whole world spent struggling from the disease, which is COVID. And it is not only the COVID as a disease, I think it spread in a manner that there was a lot of controversy around it. And controversy is, of course, something that we can talk about a little later. But what China also did, it militarily attacked a number of places. And for us, it is relevant that it actually brought in forces very rapidly into eastern Ladakh and went and captured certain areas north of Pagongso and came into areas of Gogra, Hot Spring, Depsang. And as a result, Indian Army very quickly reacted to it and occupied some very relevant heights south of Pangong. So, and that is when the entire military to military, eyeball to eyeball contact established some kind of a checkmated, scenario. And this year, very quickly, Chinese pulled out after the 9th Corps commanders meet. So what we are talking about today is not force on force or eyeball to eyeball or military to military contact warfare. We are talking about something which is beyond contact warfare, for the simple reason that when people were speculating whether we are going to war or not, or whether we have already been fighting a war with the Chinese, it is easy for people who've understood the conventional warfare that two forces fight physically. But last year, what happened, other than Galwan and few skirmishes near the Blacktop Hill, there was no way that both forces started to fire at each other. No firearms were used. As a result, we started talking about technologies which the Chinese have used, are using, possibly, and have been using, and are likely to use to win a war. As Sun Tzu says, that it is important to win a war without fighting. Now, is that what the Chinese doing? That they bring the forces, not fight physically, but they would still want to win a war? We need to understand the DNA of the Chinese. Now, today, China has come to a stature of their own reckoning to say we have arrived. China does not want itself to be referred to as a regional power or even a growing power. They have arrived, and how they have arrived at this stature is that their technological power has emerged as the most relevant contributor to the comprehensive national power. Earlier, when we calculated the comprehensive national power, we could never, ever imagine that very quickly it is going to be the technological power, which is going to be the major driving force. And how the technological power can be seen is, few indications are that you study the innovative index of a country, you study the HRD index of a country, and you study the industrial index of a country. When you sum total it, it will give you the total R&D index, the research and development power. As a result, when Brigadier Mahajan was talking about the military 4.5, with technologies which are coming up, when I realized that there is a deficiency in our way of looking at how much technology we have actually inducted into our armed forces, I stumbled upon three things in military 4.0, and I talk about power, I talk about materials, and I talk about electronics. If a country has not invested in these three, you are unlikely to succeed in major contribution towards being a technological power. If you look at China, the batteries come from there, that is power. The rare earth materials come from there. 60% of the rare earth materials are with China. And when you talk about electronics, you look at how much they have invested in the research and development. All the chips and large amount of chips are actually coming from China. So if the PME, which is the prime driver of technological power, is with China, then what do you expect? How would they do R&D? Because even their innovative index is high, their human resource index is high, their industrial complex, making it a very high industrial index, gives them an opportunity for R&D. And with PME put together, well, they are right on the top and actually challenging the Americans. Americans are very worried about it. The US has, for many, many decades now, remained as the sole power dictating the future of the globe. But Chinese have last year actually come out and have openly started threatening the world, economically, trade-wise, militarily. And what is happening is now that they have used a strategy. In the strategy, they have actually set the house of their adversaries on fire. And in their own strategy say, you must loot a burning house. How do you loot a burning house? You must burn the adversary's house first. You see there is disruption all over. Countries are actually coping up their own economic struggle because of the COVID disruption which came in. As a result, the house is on fire of major adversaries of China. It is very, in a very insidious manner, helping the adversaries of their adversaries, and it means creating friends through which the technology is being supplied to become a greater multiplier of disruption. So when you talk about warfare, warfare is not about shooting bullets at each other or shooting guns or missiles at each other. I think largely this is what the disruptive technologies would do. And I suppose, Brigadier Mahajan, I would finish here to introduce how the Chinese would fight the warfare, that is fighting war and winning it without actually fighting it. So fighting differently through technology.
Yes, thanks a lot for your opening remarks. And what I want to tell you today is, when this Ladakh crisis was at its peak, basically, if you see, there was what is called as, they use certain terms, like they talked about, I wonder if you can hear me properly.
I can hear you.
Yeah, okay. When the Ladakh crisis was at its peak, there were certain terms that they used. They said, we have drones which will provide hot food or warm food to the soldiers deployed on the front. Then they talked about direct energy weapons. They'll say troops, Indian troops deployed at Pangangso Lake and Galwan Valley. They'll be attacked with direct, they will use microwave oven weapons against them. Though, of course, that capability they don't have. Then they talked about super soldiers. They say we have creating super soldiers who can carry twice the amount of weight than what your soldiers can carry. We have given them some kind of gadgetries by which they will perform much better. But that was not how it actually turned out on ground. It was the Indian soldiers' capability to fight, good leadership, those old world war tactics actually won us the day as far as the Ladakh standoff was concerned. So what I would request you is, how much of this kind of a technology were the Chinese able to use, because they claim a lot of things, but what they have actually been able to use is very little of it. So can you tell us as to what advances the Chinese have made in these kind of fields, and how much of it have they used somewhere or the other? Because they talk a lot, there's a lot of psychological warfare, there's a lot of propaganda warfare, but what we find is that they are not been able to use the kind of a technology they claim to have in actual warfare. Though, of course, they have done a wonderful job as far as cyber attacks are concerned. They have done a wonderful job as far as disrupting you via stealing your big data is concerned. But militarily, how much of it could they use? Please tell us about that, and then you can talk about the other non-contact means that they use. Over to General Pannu.
Thank you, Brigadier Mahajan. I think the war is not over. I think the game is still in the play. It won't be proper to say that the end game has happened. The end game has not happened, and we actually cannot see the end to it yet. Because when I said that the actual competition that the Chinese have is to cross America before 2050, they use such disruptions like COVID to disturb the world and go ahead by re-energizing the calendar of speed, and they want to actually beat their own ambitions, and therefore they would want to weaken their adversaries and go ahead of them. I will just talk about, when they came in contact with our troops over a period of time, you saw certain better technologies that they had. For reconnaissance, very close to the troops, they had better all-terrain vehicles and articulated all-terrain vehicles. It means these are tracked, double-tracked, and then they're pushing and pulling each other. So therefore, their movement in the mountains was heavily supported by technology. This is to keep the troops fit and less fatigued. They were all having communications which are ubiquitous and real-time, completely secure and satellite-based. And they had actually invested a lot in rapid acclimatization, forward medical facilities, speedy evacuation, and better clothing. They also invested a huge amount of money in creating a digital wall all along the frontier. I'm calling it a frontier because you can't call it a border, you can't call it a LAC, it is a mix of all. So all along the frontier, they have got a digital wall, which gives them ground information. And they have also got 24/7 informatization activities where it is completely digital, that they get a three-dimensional view, including the satellite pictures and ground pictures and all the other, cyber warfare and other things that I'm going to talk about. So as a result, when they have not actually gone to war, they brought in this equipment, they use this equipment to prove that the sustainability is good as far as the technology is concerned. We have not spoken about human to human, and I think that is not even a comparison, neither it is a subject of today's debate. But when you're talking about the overall non-kinetic, non-contact, we must be aware that the space is a domain where China has invested very heavily, which is giving them a good surveillance. They have got China high-resolution Earth observation system, and they are developing this in a manner that they would always keep the Indian landscape, not only Indian landscape, but all the in areas under interest in constant watch. They have actually gone in for investment, which is 300 times larger than field of view from the satellite, which is even larger than the US Hubble Space Telescope. They have invested in that kind of a thing. So the surveillance is real time. It is giving them very high resolution pictures. They can actually make out what infrastructure we are making, where the military is moving, whatever is happening in the hinterland, how the logistics are coming up, and how the whole assessment then gets converted into good analytics. And this analytics are also down to the tactical battlefield area analytics. As a result, it is not that the Chinese language, it is the entire computer gives them a ready-made situational upgrade right up to the analytics available at the hands of commanders on ground. Similarly, when you talk about surveillance, they have invested hugely into geospatial data and monitoring movements and locations, as I told you. And also, they have invested in HEMANT, and HEMANT of theirs is something which is completely invisible. They've been able to hide it very well through the missions and through the trade that they do. Because a number of companies which operate all over the world, number of students who are moving around all over the world are giving them HEMANT. Their industry and the business partners, a number of apps which are, being sold in these countries are huge. So the Chinese footprint is not only on the borders or behind the borders or in space and cyber, but also in HEMANT. Similarly, when you talk about their artificially generated natural acts, they have invested hugely in changing the weather conditions, in changing the biological and the radiological, use of agents. They have actually triggered floods, rains, clouds, and fog through a combination of electronic emissions and chemicals. So therefore, all that, if it is put together, you will realize that their adversaries are all the time kept under surveillance and constant disruption, and they would cover the natural calamity and camouflage it under the acts of God. And once you cover that under the acts of God, the adversary is in any case weakened. So, I will again keep reminding of Sun Tzu, you win a war without fighting one. So therefore, all these things put together bring them to huge amount of deception, huge amount of cyber surveillance, intelligence, cyber data manipulation, and deterrence to bring the sights down. Say, for example, you gave an example of all electricity infrastructure crumbling. In Bombay, there was a blackout. So they have actually got the entire critical infrastructure, which is based on the cyber, and also the use of all three dimensions, the internet, the deep web, and the dark web. They use all three dimensions. Their 5G technology and their electronic market has made them actually sit in every possible place where there is anything to do with computer. And so they are all there, they're all pervasive. And I have not yet spoken about certain things, but at the moment, I will just leave it at that and would want your interjection and then cover certain more areas after this.
Yes, General Pannu, you have covered this, their capabilities to use technology for surveillance, for movement, etc. very, very well. I would want you to tell me about two things as to what is Indian capability in this field. I'm sure it is going to improve because you are in charge of Defense Cyber Agency, Defense Space Agency, etc. That is one aspect. And secondly, you talked about the Chinese intelligence. Unfortunately, in the Indian scenario, even a schoolboy knows about Pakistani intelligence or Pakistan's intelligence agency, ISI. You just utter word ISI and people will give you a talk for next 1 hour as to what they're doing, bleeding India by 1,000 cuts, etc. But Chinese intelligence, very little is known about it. And you very rightly said that every China man today is a first, let's say, an intelligence gathering person, be it student, be it people in the, let's say, in the corporate world, people who are tourists, and all kinds of techniques they use, including softwares, including hardwares, including apps, to collect data from all over. And of course, recently, since last few months, government has banned all the Chinese apps. We are trying to come out of the Chinese clutches as far as technology is concerned, because anything and everything which has a Chinese connection, there is always a fear that data will get leaked, and they have such a huge capacity for computing and analyzing data that they can possibly find out, will know you better than what we know us, So what I would like you to tell me now is, yes, Chinese are ahead. There's no doubt on this issue. But while China technologically is ahead, but it is the Indian soldiers, by virtue of their human element of war, their leadership, their physical fitness, their toughness, their mental capability, not to get bogged down by the kind of a propaganda warfare that the Chinese launched through our media, through their social media, etc. We still managed to hold our own. And that credit is, of course, to the soldiers, officers leading from the front, the commanders on the spot, right from a brigade commander to a corps commander, even to an army commander, and of course, the chief. Those are the pluses. The human angle of ours is definitely was much better, and it was proved in that manner that the Chinese soldiers were not willing to serve on the front, while they had a lot of issues. All of them, they come there for only 3 years, and they are always looking backwards because most of them want to go back and start their career in somewhere else. So that will be a longish topic. I will not talk about it right now. But what I will request you now is that in this non-kinetic, non-contact things, what is the kind of a progress that we are making, and what do you think is going to happen, say, in the near future of 1 to 5 years, and maybe even after that? Over to you, General Pannu.
Thank you, Brigadier Mahajan. Since it is an open domain, I would not want to really talk about certain things, but let me assure you that as far as Indian Defense Forces are concerned, very timely raise space and the services. Our DRDO and ISRO put together that, as far as ASAT is concerned, in 2019, actually we broke a satellite, in the counter space technology demonstration in Mission Shakti. Also, as far as our other satellites are concerned, I think our space industry has now got a huge fillip from the ISRO, that their labs are being opened up for startups to use and collaborate and go into business. But I think there's a lot of work in progress because the race is rapid and fast. And I think we need to catch up hugely in these technologies. So I would again draw your attention to the power, materials, and electronics. I think that is where our industry needs to invest. And when I talk about military 4.5, I actually talk about military leading the industry, because industry sometimes gets wavered. They have no idea what the military wants. And if military also doesn't know the capability and the capacities of our own industrial base, then there is a problem in actually collaborating. So therefore, 4.5 is actually taking the industry beyond the industrial age, that is the info age of 4.0. When I talk about Chinese, Chinese actually take another leap. They have encryption, quantum computing, quantum physics, or increasingly is going to be protected by the quantum technology. Their encryption is going to be much faster. So therefore, it will be difficult to break their codes. And they will use the same technology to break our codes, which is going to be done much more easily. So as a result, we are quite mindful of it to make sure that we continue to protect ourselves. So what I would say is that our cyber and space would hugely invest in defending ourselves first before we go in for disruptive technologies which are more deterrent in nature. I think with the Chinese, it is not only that you create some kind of a deterrence, which is dissuasive, but I think you have to go for a credible deterrence, and therefore we have to also ramp up our AI capabilities in our electronics and machine-to-machine learning. I think that is where we need to invest. And I think hugely, they are much into information warfare. Information warfare really is a great game when I talk about 5G, because 5G is not only giving you service, but also completely controlling you. If 5G technology of the Chinese was almost there, in our country to be taken in, they would have completely had not only the information but also control of most of our machines. So therefore, using that, they can use the information warfare for targeting the minds of soldiers and people, which we have to be every media post must be seen if it is demoralizing the Indian soldiers and Indian citizens. You should know that there is something, and we need to secure ourselves that not to go into keep forwarding something which is disrupting your own minds, because disrupting technology is disrupting the minds, and they will completely upset the morale of our Indian troops and also citizens. Because you see, what is happening is when you fight a war, you're fighting one on the borders. That is on the northern front, and it can also be two front if you invest in and encourage the adversaries by giving them technology and military power. But I think largely the hinterland needs to be protected. That is the population of India. And that is where information warfare and cyber and the space, where all the time you are being under watch. So this great game is something I think we need to understand and play accordingly. Similarly, the third dimension is, as I said, first borders and then hinterland is the international arena. Because if you're making friends with somebody else, they would want to cause disruption in there. Coming together into technology so that we don't collaborate in technology. So I think that is what has also been understood when you collaborate with others. More so, when you are talking about non-contact and non-kinetic, it is not about military, which does maneuver. The strategy is both in maneuver and also in mind. So therefore, both these can also be controlled by technology. So therefore, the strategy is an application, and there is no technology which would be successful unless it is accompanied by strategy. And I think the Chinese are quite successful to maneuver around in the world. But I think with COVID, the way the whole world has got damaged, I think Chinese have been caught. And I think the whole world is looking at their disruption, which they are causing through all the biological, radiological, the industrial complex, and the military complex. And I think we need to watch the non-kinetic, non-contact aspects, because more often than not, we keep looking at kinetic and contact aspects. So therefore, I think we chose the right topic, that let's not talk about the kinetic and contact, because that is where people keep looking at. But I think what is more damaging and what is more disturbing is when you look at the non-contact and non-kinetic.
I'll offer about 2 comments, and then I'll request you again comments from you. Non-kinetic, non-contact, information warfare, psychological warfare, propaganda warfare, disinformation warfare. These are all our country cousins and related to each other. And they launched a propaganda based when this Ladakh problem started off, and it was Indian media which fell into their trap. You would remember that there was a I'm sure at that point of time, you must have gone on TV number of times and must have spoken to a lot of TV media, a lot of print media. But there was a headline, Chinese tanks there at so-and-so place. So they asked me, I said, you think our tanks are now resting at Ahmednagar? Or Chinese guns have reached at so-and-so place? Are our guns today resting at Devali or Nashik Road? China, 50,000 soldiers. You think our soldiers are having a good time in Pune or something? So unfortunately, there were 3 or 4 targets they were trying to target in this information war of theirs. One is the leadership of the country, second are the armed forces, third is the common people. So leadership wasn't affected too much. A common soldier or the Indian armed forces were able to overcome this effect of information warfare in a good manner. But some section of the society were definitely worried, and some well-meaning people, oh my God, Chinese are concentrated. What do you do? Chinese are come to next to Pangangso Lake. What do they do? And terms like finger 3, finger 4 became, people started talking about it as if it's some lane in Pune, where you go daily, and they were experts on talking on finger 4 and all. So information warfare, as you're right, soldiers is one aspect, but a common citizen today is almost a soldier in this information warfare. And you have rightly said that you should forward nothing which has got an anti-India bias or trying to overstate something, trying to sow a seed of doubt in your mind that our armed forces are not capable. We have to give a message to everybody, which is what you try to do, that Indian armed forces are more than capable of meeting the military challenge. There is no doubt on that, the kinetic aspects. But the non-military challenge or the non-kinetic aspect is an issue on which we still have to work upon. And you talked about how the mind can be changed. There's a word, there's a term used these days called hacking the mind. You can hack into a mind of somebody. And the best example that I can give you from the history is, I think 1 decade or 2 decades back, there was a person called Gorbachev. He was the leader of the United States Soviet Republic. And suddenly his mind was struck up, perestroika, glasnost. And what happened thereafter, that a mighty USSR broke into so many countries, Russia and many others. So this was one great example of a leader being targeted, whether it was done by the Americans, whether it was done by anybody else, only Gorbachev can tell you. But these kind of programs are even now going on. In fact, there was a friend of mine who was based in USA. He claimed to be a part of a team that targeted Gorbachev's mind. I don't know whether he's overstating it or not, but the fact is USSR broke, and fact is it shouldn't have broken, but it broke because the leader at that point of time thought that the country had no future. And something similar, I don't want to sort of highlight it too much, happened to us in 1962 when we lost the battle of 62 in the minds of the leadership, while not even 90% of the Indian Army had not been utilized, and 100% of Air Force and 100% of Navy had not been utilized. But the battle was lost in the minds of people. So we have had a very good session in which you talked about non-kinetic and non-contact thing. Now, what I will request you is kindly give your concluding remarks on this aspect. Of course, I must tell you that we are happy to learn from you that while we cannot talk about our own capabilities in an open domain for obvious reasons, but about the enemy, we can talk about it in the open domain, definitely. So kindly tell us, give your concluding remarks on this non-kinetic, non-contact warfare, and tell us what you think we'll be able to achieve, say, in a short-term future of 5 years and a long-term future thereafter. Over to you, Jagan.
Thank you, Brigadier MAHAJAN. I think our country is blessed that we face challenges. If we had not faced challenges, we would not know how to shape our future as you talk about next 5-10 years. We are also lucky that we have a global power now, which is right in our neighborhood, and it is challenging us directly. So, you don't have to play a match with a 10th or the 5th team in the world. You're almost playing an even match with a power which claims itself to be risen. It is going to continue to challenge us. So therefore, we have to make sure that we invest in our military, in our internal strengths, and also in our comprehensive national power in a manner that we are actually competing in the top 3. And if we don't, then it means we would have run out of time and we are going to be on the wrong side of the history. And I think enough investment and enough mind is being spent by the Indian, intelligentsia and our think tanks and the government in that regard. As far as the information warfare, psychological warfare, or hacking the minds of people is concerned, well, there is always in warfare, psychological warfare actually is meant at 4 planes. One is that you must make your own leader happy and self-confident about the decisions, that Xi Jinping is taking. So therefore, a lot of news was being fed to their own leader that his morale should be high, when the whole world was actually booing at him for bringing on the COVID crisis. And also, it was very important for the PLA to send some good news to their own leader so that the morale doesn't go down. And secondly, their own people, because when every country in the world was talking against China, obviously the morale of the people and their own PLA would go down. I think a lot of news was being fed for their own. And of course, their friends, that is our adversaries, they have made certain friends, like Pakistan and all that. I mean, imagine if the news of defeat of China or, difficulty of the Chinese troops is fed to Pakistan, how would they feel? They would feel miserable about, being allied to a wrong partner. So, that is how psychological warfare is not only aimed against the adversary, but when it is aimed at the adversary, it is also to demoralize the leadership of that country, demoralize the people of that country, and demoralize the allies or friends of that country. I think these are the themes which are written down, and that is how the psychological warfare agendas are prepared, and there are experts who write these scripts. But having said that, there has to be some amount of credibility. If there is nothing and you make mountain out of it, very soon the psychological warfare also, campaign disappears. So therefore, something has to be there for a successful psychological warfare or hacking of the mind is concerned. If it doesn't smell, if it doesn't sound, so you cannot say that somebody burst a cracker next to you. It must smell and sound of a cracker. Only then you would know that there is something. Well, then you can keep building cracker to a bomb. Well, that is a gap, and that is how the statecraft is also built in what you tell your own people and when you tell the outside world. That is the difference between the two. You tell different stories to these. And I suppose as far as technology is concerned and as far as strategy is concerned, I think we need to invest in both heavily, which we are doing. And I think our nation, as I said, would take these, challenges as opportunities. And I think an opportunity is there. And I think in next 5 to 10 years, we would come out, with flying colors, because it is going to be a necessity to survive and necessity to win.
Those were very reassuring words. I was looking at the chat box. There are a lot of questions that have come up, but I'll take only one or two of them. I will just combine all these questions so that we don't overshoot the time too much. There's a book written some time back called "The Amazing Race Between the Chinese Hare and the Indian Tortoise." Amazing race between the Chinese hare and the Indian tortoise. All of us have read Aesop Niti, and we know that it was the tortoise which won the race, because the tortoise was Dheyavadi. It did not fall or prey to temptations which came en route, while the hare was overconfident. He stopped at many places, looked at beauties around, and the race was won by a tortoise. So let us hope that the Indian tortoise gets turned into a hare and wins the race. But there's one thing I would like to ask you a question about, that today, if you look at world's best technological institutions, I repeat, world's best technological institutions like NASA, National Aeronautics Space Administration, we all know that 30% of the scientists are Indians. Today, you take Fortune 500 companies like Google and Microsoft and all, the CEOs are Indians. The CEOs are Indians. And today you take, let's say, the strongest country in the world, and its vice president, Kamala Harris, has Indian roots. So please tell me, the Indians perform so well when they go outside India, but inside India, they start asking for things which government can't give you. Everybody wants something. Mujhe ye chahiye, mujhe wo chahiye, economic appeasement, and nobody is willing to tell as to what he will do for the country. He only wants something from the country, But when they go outside, they put their heads down and put on hard work and rise to the top in their careers. So my question to you after this longish thing is, are we trying to get such bright minds in America or in Europe who are already working on technology like artificial intelligence, etc., and get them to us, get them into DRDO, get them in the ISRO, so that instead of crawling, we leapfrog into the world of disruptive technologies. Over to you, General Pannu.
I think the direction of wind is very important to know. When the brain drain happens, it happens from one place to another. And we must mark how the brain drain has happened in our country. You just need to follow the IHRD, index. And if you follow that, unfortunately, in last year, we came down by 2 digits, by 2 levels. What is happening is that human resource development not happening here, or there's a brain drain happening. I do not know whether that was the factor in it, but how can the HRD fall? Similarly, our global innovation index is going up. It means there are people who are innovating, and the necessity is actually driving them towards the innovation, and innovation will contribute to R&D. And both ISRO and DRDO are doing a great job. We have to also follow examples. If the best technology is outside, our defense industry cannot actually churn out something which is 3rd generation. They have to churn out something which is 4th generation. And therefore, I keep talking about that unless we guide them to 4.5, we are not going to be better than the adversaries. So therefore, if the will is to take this industry to have its own innovation and its own production, we must target to get our materials right, to get the power and the electronics right, start manufacturing our own chips. We have to get not only the rare earth materials to our country, but also look at the planetary materials. When you talk about ISRO, ISRO is not about what it does on ground. I think largely ISRO is something that it should be doing in the other planets to make an access to the planetary materials, because the Chinese have landed and others, other countries have all landed somewhere or the other. They're doing great research work. There's a lot of R&D which is happening on the other planets, and they would fly in some material there, which would contribute to rare earth plus rare planetary materials. And therefore, the manufacturing has to really ramp up. We have to not only become just, quantity manufacturers. I think we need to go for quality manufacturing, and our defense industry has to become export-oriented. If our defense products are sold best in the world, then our military will automatically benefit out of it. Our industry cannot produce something which is 3rd generation and expect the Indian armed forces to buy it. I think this is where we need to go.
Thanks a lot. I was tempted to continue with the session, but we already have overshot timing by about 17 minutes than what we had planned at. So all that remains for me now is to thank you once again for a very illuminating session on non-contact and non-kinetic warfare. And I want to tell everybody that we are going to meet again in a second session on Thursday in the evening from 7:30 to 7:50 or 8 o'clock. So kindly spread the news around by a word of mouth. And definitely like this session on the Facebook. It is also being broadcasted together on the YouTube also. So have a look at it, share link with everybody, because today knowledge is power. If you share positive news, positive knowledge with everybody, the family will prosper, the society will prosper, and the country will prosper. Disruptive technologies has a lot of positive advantages, which we are not utilizing fully. In fact, the mobile phone that most of us carry is called a smartphone, because somebody told me, why is it called a smartphone? Because possibly it is more smarter than the owner who's using it. There are so many facilities which are there in that, including voice typing, including facial recognition, which we can use in day-to-day life. I was just reminded when one was a senior officer in the army, one used to dictate his dictation to his PA and such like people. But now you don't require a PA. You can dictate it into your mobile, either in Marathi or in English or in Hindi. So that is a power of technology which has come at your, at the tip of your hand. So we must utilize it. So because only when everybody becomes world-class in using technology, the society prospers and the country prospers. So with this, we will end the session. And there are some other questions which were there. There's a lot of response. People have liked the session. That is what I can see on the Facebook, because my second computer is running and showing me what's happening on the Facebook. In the chat box, also there are people, Rajkumar Tiwari, Purushottam Dhole, Sakshi Agarwal, Rajendra Paradkar, me, Savarkar, many people Some of the names I am not taking because we are extremely short of time. They all have thanked you. So I, on behalf of everybody at the Smarak, thank you for this illuminating session. And I tell everybody that we'll stop now, but we'll definitely meet and continue with the next part of this talk on